بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يشرفني رحب بالإخوة المشاركين بالمؤتمر العربي الثالث لإدارة النفايات الصلبة، اللي الحمد لله المؤتمرين السابقين نجحوا نجاح كبير جدا، وكان في مشاركة ممتازة جدا إن كان على المستوى المباشر على الزوم وإن كان على المتابعة على الفيسبوك. الحقيقة أكبر شغلة بيعاني منها مع الأسف الوطن العربي بموضوع النفايات الصلبة هي موضوع تمويل المشاريع، لذلك بنشوف ضعف كبير جدا بإدارة النفايات الصلبة بمعظم الدول العربية. هذا طبعا عم يسبب بيئة غير صحية وغير آمنة بموضوع النفايات الصلبة. لازم نبحث عن طريقة لنقدر نطور فيها هذه النفايات، وما دام الموضوع يحتاج لتمويل إذا يجب أن نبحث عن مصادر للتمويل هذه النفايات الصلبة. طبعا ممكن نفكر بحلول بسيطة بالبداية ضمن إمكانياتنا. في كثير بعض الحلول اللي ممكن الواحد على مستوى بسيط يتابعها. كمثل يعني على هذا الموضوع، لو فكرنا ونحن كلنا بنعرف انه نحن بشكل عام تربتنا العربيه تحتاج لموضوع السماد والدبانه اللي بنستخدم لتحسين طبيعه التربه من هذه النفايات العضويه. والنفايات العضويه نسبتها ببلادنا العربيه غالبا تزيد عن 60% او خلينا نقول 50% باحسن الاحوال. فلو فكرنا نعمل معامل تحويل لسماد ولو على مستوى بسيط، يعني نحن بامكاننا بطريقه التخمر الهوائي بامكانيات بسيطه نجمع، ويجب ان نفكر انه نجمع النفايات العضويه المستقله، يعني النفايات الخضراء من سوق الهان ياخذها الواحد، النفايات الخضراء اللي بتقوم البلديات بقص الاشجار وغيرها، لو جمعنا جزء من النفايات هذه ونحاول نحولها لسماد بامكانيات بسيطه، يعني ما في داعي نشتري تورنر بملايين الليرات بالبدايه. فنحن بكل بساطه بامكاننا نجيب بشيول او تركس نسميه، نقلب هذه النفايات نجهزها ونستفاد منها. طيب الخطوه الثانيه البحث عن التمويل. والبحث عن التمويل افضل طريقه انه نفكر انه يساهم منتج النفايات بتمويل عمليات التخلص من هذه النفايات. نعرف كلنا انه التجارب العالميه صارت منتشرة بشكل كبير وبمجملها ناجح، بينما مع الأسف بالوطن العربي بنشوف حتى الآن هذه العملية أول شيء محدودة جدا جدا جدا، وثاني شيء لسه نتائجها غير ظاهرة. ولو بحثنا بالوطن العربي بنشوف فقط يمكن الجزائر والمغرب هن اللي بدأوا بخطوات بهذا المجال. لذلك وجدنا أنه خير من يمكن يدير هذا الحوار من عمل بهذا المجال، وهو صديقنا العزيز المهندس كريم أمن، مدير وكالة تصريف النفايات في الجزائر الشقيقة. والمهندس كريم هو مهندس متخصص بمعالجة النفايات السائلة، بدأ من عام 1991 ل 2010، يعني حوالي 20 سنة ما شاء الله يشتغل بموضوع النفايات السائلة، وعنده ماجستير بإدارة الرشاحة أو نسميها العصارة الناتجة عن النفايات. وبدأ عمله كمدير لمنشأة معالجة النفايات السائلة ومعمل تحويل لسماد. بعدها دار مشروع تعاون دولي بين الجزائر وسويسرا لمشروع تجريبي لفرز النفايات. وبين عام 2009 و2013 كان مسؤول عن إدارة مدفن صحي للنفايات في منطقة بيردا قرب الجزائر العاصمة، بما فيها عمليات فرز وتدوير النفايات. هذا طبعا أهله يصبح مدير عام لوكالة النفايات الوطنية في الجزائر اعتبارا من عام 2014، وهو أيضا عضو اتفاقية بازل نقل النفايات الخطرة، وعضو مكتب الاتفاقية ممثل لأفريقيا. اسمحوا لي انتقل لزميلنا العزيز المهندس كريم ليدير الحوار مع خبراء اللي شرفونا من شركة لاند الألمانية، وهي شركة مؤهلة وضليعة بهذا بموضوع مسؤولية المنتج. لذلك تفضل المهندس كريم، الميكروفون معك.
شكرا. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. First of all, I'd like to welcome all of you to this online workshop. I'm very grateful to Dr. Abdullah and the engineer Amir for inviting me to moderate this important meeting on waste management. Of course, all of us is aware that Arab societies are still facing a huge challenge regarding waste management. We all agree that financing, as we said, Engineer Amir, is the most important of them. Our countries rely on public funding. Investment and management also are shouldered by public funding, but how to shift towards a sustainable funding? Of course, extended producer responsibility is a modern approach to avoid public funding, and it seems that it's the way to go. But what does EPR mean? How does it work? And who is responsible for? Our countries should learn and figure out the best solutions. Thanks to Dr. Abdullah for bridging Arab countries with Germany for this case. It's definitely the way to go. For this purpose, and on behalf of the organizers and the attendees, I welcome Thomas Fischer and Christopher Paul from Landbell Group. They are going to tell us more about EPR and about German experience implementing it. Afterwards, and before opening the floor for discussion, we will listen for brief remarks from Sebastian Frisch from Black Forest and Sami Eldibis from Syria. I want also to bring to your attention that we are not going to leave before hearing some words from Dr. Khashashna, Vice Minister at Jordan Ministry of Environment. Jordan is leading.
مهندس كريم بعد اذنك عم يتشكوا من موضوع الصوت شوي، يا ريت هيك تقرب الميكروفون عند حضرتك.
Okay. So we are not going to leave before hearing some words from Dr. Khashashna, Vice Minister at Jordan Ministry of Environment. All of us know that Jordan is a leading Arab country in waste management and is working on implementing EPR. So it will be quite useful to share with us this experience. So let's start now with the first communication on EPR. Thomas and Christoph, the floor is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for inviting us for that call, and it will be a pleasure for us to present about extended producer responsibility. Thank you to Abdullah Nasur for making that happen. And let me share my screen with you. So I hope you can see it now. Yes, thank you very much for the nice introduction. Indeed, we have implemented extended producer responsibility in several countries, not only in Germany, even I'm based in Germany. We were invited to explain a little bit about what is the concept of EPR, what is the success story also here. And of course, implementation has some issues here and there. And that's why I will share the presentation also with my colleague, Christoph Pudra, who has a lot of operational experience in operating EPR and related producer responsibility organizations. And he will present about the second part. I will start with an introduction of the Lampe Group, explaining you who we are, what we are doing, and then it's followed up with the key of the presentation today about extended producer responsibility. I will start with a brief intro about the concept itself, where does it come from, why it was implemented, and then I will present about a few operational setups, what are the typical setups of EPR we see in the world. And then I will hand over to my colleague, Christoph Pudra, who will share with you about his operational experiences, some core considerations, how to implement EPR, the importance of stakeholders and their related roles and responsibilities. Even it's about producers, of course, there are other stakeholders who have a core responsibility and a role to play in EPR. And then he will present about a case study. We choose Brazil for electronic waste and showing you about the difficulties we had here to implement that. It's still in implementation, even it's running almost 10 years already. And after that, he will present about, he will present you a summary and some basic steps we see on the road to implement EPR. Who is the Lampe Group? So the Lampe Group has basically three core businesses. The first one is about pan-European producer responsibility organization. The second one is consultancy, and the third is software solutions. Pan-European producer responsibility organizations, this is what the presentation is mainly about. So we operate schemes for batteries, electronic waste, and for packaging waste in multiple countries. The Lampe itself started as a packaging scheme at the end of the 90s in response to German legislation here. So that's where the journey started actually. And this was set up also in competition to the Green Dot, which most of you might know. ERP, that's our main brand, European Recycling Platform in Producer Responsibility Organization. They were set up at the early 2000s as a response to the European Directive on Electronic Waste. And later on, it's expanded also to batteries. I will show you later on a map where we are active. In 2014, ERP became the European Recycling Platform, became part of the Lampe Group. So that's why we call ourselves now as Lampe Group, because it's packaging and batteries in multiple countries. In 2015, also we started with consultancy because we got more and more requests from producers to explain about their obligations in the multiple markets, because EPR became quite complex for them, facing a lot of different legislations also across Europe. Even we have a harmonization, or we have the directives which should aim for harmonization. Still, we see national differences in several aspects, and producers need guidance here because it's not their core business. The consultancy we acquired is H2 Compliance, based in Dublin in Ireland. And their focus was early on the chemicals legislation in Europe. Maybe you heard about the REACH regulation. So this is the European chemicals legislation, which is quite complex. And they had a lot of experience about consultancy of producers here. And they expanded their consultancy activities to batteries and packaging. One very important element in operating a producer responsibility organization is the software you have, because you have to deal with many, many stakeholders. You will see that later on in an overview, whom you have to deal with. So first of all, of course, you need reporting tools for the producers, because they should finance that in the end. And we also manage our suppliers with the software solutions. And last but not least, for small producers, we have also so-called online shops where they get compliance on a pretty easy way. This is the map where we are right now with our schemes. So if you're a W, it's about waste electronic, a B is about batteries, and a P is about packaging. So we are across Europe operating services to the producers. Our approach, and that was how we were set up originally, was to be a kind of one-stop shop to the producer, so that the producer can buy the compliance from us from one party. Imagine a producer of electronics containing batteries, so he needs to ensure compliance with 3 types of legislation in Europe, which is take back of the electronic product, take back of their batteries, which are contained in the product, and of course, every product which is being sold is in a package, so they have also to take care of the packaging take back. So this was our approach, to offer one solution for them and avoid that they have to go in every country to a different player, and for every waste stream to a different waste stream as well. This vision was also the vision of our founders of a European recycling platform, for example. So they were set up by 4 core companies, which were HP, so Hewlett-Packard, Electrolux, Brown, which is a Procter & Gamble company, and Sony. And those 4 companies set up the European recycling platform in order to ensure a simplified compliance for themselves. Today, we can claim to be the only pan-European producer responsibility organization. There's no one else. We are the only one having multi-country knowledge and multi-streams capabilities. Our competitors are typically national schemes. Maybe they have 2 or 3 countries for one waste stream, but most of the time they are operating one scheme for one waste stream in one country. Some figures about us. So we have 32 producer responsibility organizations which operate right now in 14 countries. We serve almost 30,000 customers, the figure from last year, generating a turnover last year of around 180,000 million euro. And this year we are aiming for 200 million euro. In terms of waste we have treated, so since the setup since 2004, we collected and treated 3.5 million tons of electronic waste. We collected and treated since 2010, we started a bit later with batteries, around 72,000 tons of batteries. And in packaging, since 2004, we treated and collected about 5 million tons of packaging across all the countries I spoke about before. Now coming to EPR, what is the concept, what it is about? The first mention of extended producer responsibility, which is known in the literature, is from Thomas Lindqvist. Thomas Lindqvist is a professor at the Lund University in Sweden. And he had the idea to expand the responsibility of the producers beyond the producing a product, selling a product and giving it to the customer, maybe having some warranties and guarantees to fulfill and some product safety requirements. But apart from that, then their responsibility stopped. And he had the idea to expand that to the whole life cycle of a product, including the take-back, recycling, and the final disposal of the product. And this was in the early 90s or 1999. And this was then considered by the German Environmental Ministry, Mr. Töpfer, who was in that time the environmental minister in Germany. And he had to find a solution for the increasing packaging waste in Germany. So that's why he took, as the first minister, as far as we are aware of, the chance to implement EPR for packaging waste in Germany. Also OECD then later on came up with a definition for extended producer responsibility. This is very similar to the concept of Mr. Lindquist, what he had in mind. So this is a policy approach that expands the producer responsibility to the whole product life cycle for the producer, and extend that to the post-consumer stage, which means take back and recycling in the end. By that, he would like to shift the responsibilities away from municipalities and the cost for municipalities by giving that to the producers, who should then be in charge physically or economically in charge of the waste and the end of life of the stage of their products. The idea here is also to provide incentives for producers to consider an environmental design. The idea is if they have to pay for the take back and recycling of their products, they will have the aim to make the product as easy to separate and recycle as being possible to lower their own cost. It also being called the polluter pays principle. In that case, the polluter is not the consumer, but the polluter is meant to be the producer, because the producer has the core impact or the core influence on the product design. What does the product contain? We have in electronic waste a lot of hazardous substances, for example, also the same in batteries. So everything which makes the recycling more complex and more difficult should be avoided as much as possible. That's why it's called polluter pays principle in terms of producers. The idea is that the cost should not be covered by municipal waste fees to the citizen. So the citizen should not pay a fee for that like they do for the normal household waste. There should also be no cost for the municipalities. They should not be charged for cleaning up and removing the waste which is generated from those product streams, which are covered by the EPR legislation in those countries who have implemented those. And finally, also quite important, in most countries, I only know one country where it's not the case, which is Japan, but there should be no cost for the last user at the point of disposal. The reason for that is rather simple. If there would be cost, the consumer would probably hesitate to bring the waste to the right waste bin or to the right collection point. So that's why it's also important, no cost for last user, to make sure that we can collect that and the consumer is using the offered solutions. All in all, everything should be financed by the producers. So they should finance the collection, the sorting, and the recycling. In collection, they often work together with municipalities, of course, because they have the infrastructure in many countries to collect waste. And here the producer might pay a gate fee to the municipalities to get access to their collection points. What are the other benefits which are expected? I touched upon that a little bit already. So the idea is to have by a separate waste collection and a completely separate waste management stream, increased recycling rates. By a parallel structure, by collecting, for example, electronic waste separately from normal household waste, we have a pure waste stream only of electronic products, which can be dealt then with individually. So we have no too much contamination, for example, with food waste in this waste stream. So that's why we can achieve better recycling and rates, and also actually the collection rates should increase. The second aspect I mentioned is it should be incentivized the design for the producers. So they should benefit from a better design by paying the lower fees into the expanded producer responsibility system. All in all, that should then maximize the resource efficiency by closing the material cycles. And you can only do that if the resources are really returned to the system and they can be tracked. So that's why a separate waste collection is quite important here. And finally, as mentioned before, the producers should minimize the impact of their products to the environment by designing them in a way that they are easy to dismantle, they are easy to recycle, they have less hazardous substances, and so on, to make sure that we can close the loop. The idea was pretty successful and spread. So this is just a map I took from the Environmental Packaging International. So this is showing where packaging EPR is being implemented globally. So all the blue countries you see, we have either mandatory or voluntary EPR schemes for packaging. In yellow, you see where it's in implementation. And in green, where we have framework EPR legislation, which still needs implementing act for the specific waste stream, in that case, packaging. So you see, it's really growing. Many countries have implemented EPR for packaging. Similar maps are existing for electronic waste and for batteries. That's what I mentioned here. So actually, the idea also spread in terms of waste streams. So we see EPR mainly for packaging, as mentioned before, for electronic waste, for batteries, but it's in Europe also existing for cars under the end-of-life vehicle directive. So it's already the four main waste streams we see in Europe, but in some countries, we also see other waste streams covered by EPR. So France is a good example for here. So in France, they collect paper with EPR, furniture, oil, also medicine, and so on. So this is existing there. So it's applicable for several waste streams. I think the only limiting factor is basically how many collection points or waste bins can you give to the consumer, not in order not to confuse them. And we see that also popping up for new waste streams. So in Europe, we have to implement by end of 2024 EPR for fishing gear. So the member states have to do that, have to implement that. And this was a response to ocean littering, in that case addressing fishing gears, because we have so many ghost gears. And that's why it should be avoided that the gears are simply released to the ocean, but they should be taken back. And we should close the loop by using the material for producing new products. What are the typical operational setups? So there are two core setups which we know. The one is the individual producer responsibility, called IPR, and the other one is collective producer responsibility, CPR. This is coming from an OECD report from 2016. So that are the two core setups which exist for EPR. Individual producer responsibility means that the producer takes care for the individual products. So that's basically brand sorted. So the producer knows where his products are. He can collect those and then can treat them and takes care individually for his own waste. This is, of course, the model which provides the most incentive for the producer, because if he has access to his own products, then he will have the biggest motivation to change his product design to make the recycling as easy as possible. However, of course, in practice, it's very difficult to implement that for the producers, because typically they don't know where their products are. They're on a mixed waste stream with other brands, with other products. So that's why it's not really implementable in most cases, at least when it's about B2C, so business to consumer. In B2B, it might be implementable, and that's what we see also in Europe, that in B2B, customers or producers try to implement IPR to benefit also from the efforts they spend into their product design. The typical setup is, of course, collective producer responsibility. So basically, producers join and set up a joint collection and a joint recycling. This is typically by product categories, for example. So it's about TVs is one category, or one category is about washing machines in we, or in packaging, we have a glass fraction and so on. This is seen to be the most cost-efficient solution, because here we have much more volumes, much higher volumes, and also it's more about the reality, because you have mixed waste streams anyway. There's one entity which is typically organizing the collective producer responsibility for the producers, which is called the Producer Responsibility Organization, which you find in that corner here of CPR. What is a producer responsibility organization? So basically, it's a vehicle to operate the collective producer responsibility. It can also be used to implement individual producer responsibility because the same mechanisms apply, but normally it's being set up to organize the collective producer responsibility. So several producers contribute to that producer responsibility organizations by asking them to take care of their end-of-waste products, end-of-life products, of course. It's also the legal entity that's organized the compliance for the producers. With all their EPR obligations, it's also the targets, because in many countries we also see collection targets or recycling targets which are given to the producers. In Europe also we see the directives, the European directives, which gives from Brussels targets to the member states to achieve certain collection or recycling targets across the EU. As mentioned before, of course, it's funded by the producers, so it's they do not only take care for the cost in collection and recycling and so on, but they also take care of the costs which show up in the producer responsibility organization itself. So they take care of the administrative cost of the producer responsibility organization, which will in return organize for them the compliance. In some countries, it's also legally mandatory to join a PRO. For example, in Germany, it was almost from the beginning that producers should join a PRO to avoid free riding. They had some branches have still the possibility to set up so-called branch solutions, which are outside of a PRO, but it's a kind of little PRO, so to say. It's not a big one, but it's one for their branch specifically. But because there was some cheating in the market to minimize the cost, so that's why the legal burden are very high meanwhile to set up such solutions to make sure that the producers really take the cost and take the cost obligations they have. In most countries, also multiple PROs are possible in competition. This is also something where our group we are being set up. So the extended producers, the European Recycling Platform, have been set up to generate competition in the waste market because the 4 producers who founded the ERP were under the impression of some monopolies in certain countries where the costs were really significant on them, and they calculated how much it would be for the electronic waste when they set up the European Recycling Platform. This was to make sure that the waste market offers the best service being available at the best possible price. So that's why competition is also for us a key here, and this is in our DNA. With all those functions of a PRO, you see there are kind of link between the different stakeholders, allowing them, the other stakeholders from producers to recyclers or collectors to focus in their core business. And the PRO is, so to say, the management entity in the center. This is explained a little bit about how the system works among the different stakeholders. I switched to the fully Arabic version. So you see the producers at the top. The producer is selling a product to the consumer. And one day the consumer would like to get rid of that product. For packaging is rather quickly, so it's within a couple of weeks. For electronic waste, it could be 10, 15, 20 years, depending on the product, or maybe also 3 years for a mobile phone. It's really depending on the product category. And then the consumer needs a solution where to bring the product. For this, the PRO takes care then. So the PRO makes a contract with the producer. The producer sends the money to the PRO depending on how much products they put on the market. Of course, the PRO is a certain price for the different categories of waste in terms of kilogram or units. So it's really depending a little bit on the local setup. And then the PRO knows how much waste they should collect on behalf of the producers they have within they have a contract with. The PRO itself will then make a contract with a recycling facility and of course with collection points. And then the collection points takes the waste from the consumers brings them, or that will be then sent to a recycling facility. Also, this is typically organized by the PRO, having contracts with logistics companies who pick up the waste from collection points and bring them to recycling facilities. In return, the collection points as well as the recycling facilities issue certificates to the PRO, which are then being used as an evidence document to the producers that they fulfilled their compliance. So that's key also to make sure that we have the right amounts of waste being recycled and collected, and assign that to producers with the related cost, of course. In some countries, and it's also a trend getting more and more important in most countries, is that the PROs are also in charge for the awareness raising towards the consumers, to make sure that the consumers really know the waste collection infrastructure, they know where to put the waste, and that they bring it there and do not simply dispose their waste in a normal municipal waste stream, where it's very difficult to sort them out again, in particular if it is contaminated with bio-waste. Yes, and with this, I would hand over to my colleague, Christoph Futra, who would like to explain you a little bit about the in-depth implementation of EPR systems, having long years of experience in setting up and operating PROs as the Chief Operating Officer of the European Recycling Platform. Christoph, will you share your screen, or should I continue? Christoph, you're mute. Christoph, you're unmuted now. Can't hear you.
I don't know if Christoph is here. He goes.
Looks like he has difficulties. Okay, then maybe I continue, Christoph.
Yeah, it's up to you, Thomas.
Christoph, okay, I will continue, and when your microphone is working, then just let me know, shout in, and then I give it to you. Okay, good, then I share the screen once more. And, oops.
Hello. Hello?
Yeah, Christoph, go ahead. Where are you?
Okay, so I don't know what happened. Let me show my screen. Good morning, everybody. Sorry for the technical blimp. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, it's fine.
Yeah, because for some reason I cannot see my screen. So I don't know what I'm doing, but hopefully this is gonna work. Okay, bear with me one sec. Let me reduce that. Okay, so it should be in full screen mode. Thank you, Thomas, for the introduction. So now I'm going to follow up with more practical steps toward implementing an EPR. And of course, the main question to start with is, what do we want to achieve? And extended producer responsibility, as explained by Thomas, is about transferring to the producer the burden of the end of life. But of course, that can translate into many different targets. Do we want to clean the cities, avoid littering? Do we want to avoid landfill? Do we want to increase recycling rates, etc.? So all those questions, of course, have to be asked upfront before designing the EPR solution, because depending on the questions we consider a priority, the end design will vary, and the regulation will vary, and the operational setup of the PRO will vary, etc., etc. So, and when asking those questions, we need to look at EPR from 3 different market angles. Of course, the first one that comes to mind spontaneously is the product for which you want to implement an EPR, be it packaging, electronics, batteries, it doesn't matter, but you need to understand how this market is working, how it is functioning, who are the responsible person. Is it mostly national manufacturing? Is it mostly importers, a mix thereof? What is the distribution channels, and so forth and so on. But in addition to this obvious market, there are also a couple more markets you need to look into. First of all is the one related to waste management. What happens today with the waste arising from those products? Who are dealing with it? How are they getting paid for this? Is it going through municipal budget? Is it just market and demand through the remarketing of the material fractions out of a recycling process? Is the informal sector involved in waste collection, in recycling? So this also has to be understood in order to make a design for EPR that will not only take stock of the reality of the current situation in the country where you want to implement EPR, but also will leverage the strength of the current setup. In any situation, there are ways to use what is already existing and improve it rather than start from a blank slate, which could lead to a slower launch time, but also some opposition and obstacles. And the last market you need to look at is the raw material market, the output fractions. How does it get traded? Is there demand for the output fraction? So for some output fraction, there are obvious demands, typically metals, aluminum, steel. There is a market, it's a commodity. So you know that if you recycle metals, there will be a demand-driven pricing for that. But there are also other output fractions for which maybe there is not available market at the moment, which means that either it becomes possible to develop a market for such output fraction, or it's going to remain a cost to be dealt with by the EPR system. And another type of question is, of course, what targets do we want to achieve? Once we say we want to increase recycling, what should be the recycling rate? What is realistic? If I say I want 100% recycling, can I achieve that? If I say I want 20% recycling, maybe I can achieve it easier, but am I enough ambitious? Those targets that I set, do I make them voluntary or mandatory to the producers? By when do I want to achieve the targets? So there is a real consideration to be given to how achievable, but also how ambitious the targets are, how it will be measured, so that we can monitor the success of the EPR system and improve it over time. Another key dimension of EPR is where this EPR is going to kick in. You cannot compare one country with another country because each country is specific, each territory is specific. In Europe, packaging electronic waste, batteries have been regulated at European level. But even that, the transposition process, the adoption process in each country has led to very different operational solutions for the simple reason that a number of key parameters are very diverse. Could be demographic, could be infrastructure, could be existing of a recycling business, etc., etc. For instance, just a simple example. In some European countries, there is a significant and strong network of municipal collection points that can take over part of the job under EPR. In some other countries, there is not, meaning that this responsibility tends to be more transferred toward retail. So there is a need to understand clearly what is the specific profile of a country, identify what are the opportunities arising as its profile, understanding also what are the challenges. In summary, you cannot copy-paste just an off-the-shelf EPR design to your country. You need to adapt it to the reality that your country is. And as mentioned here, EPR is not one size fits all. The legal framework is a key component to successful EPR. Any EPR initiatives that takes place outside of the legal framework is bound to stop when budget stops. We have seen many voluntary initiatives that can last for a while, they can show some success, but a change of priority among the volunteer consortium then can lead to the end of it. So one clear way to make EPR enforceable to all with targets that are aligned to all is to design a proper legal framework. Of course, the legal framework can still say that the approach is voluntary, but keep in mind that if you put mandatory target, it will be more effective, especially if it is followed up with strong enforcement of the regulation through measuring, auditing, and the range of penalties that could apply to those who don't comply. And the legal framework should really go into detail, be designed as clearly as possible so that there is no room for interpretation, so that everybody knows what their roles and responsibilities are, and that it can avoid cherry picking based on unclear regulation, and it can also avoid free riding based on unclear regulation. So in short, the legal framework should concentrate on stating whether the targets are mandatory or not, clarify which products are regulated, what are the targets, what is the territory, what is the registration and reporting process that will allow to measure compliance of the producer, how do we make sure that we can track products and producers under the regulation, and other specific dispositions related to how the PRO will operate. Will it operate under a license? How will the PRO demonstrate its success toward the regulatory authorities? And what will be the pricing model that will be applied on the products and on the producer? So, and the clearer the framework, the easier it is to maintain a level playing field between the various producers, and the easier it is to attract investors because they will see that there is a clear set of rules under which they can develop a business and maybe invest into a... So we've seen many good regulators with set enforcement processes, each likely not successful. And typically what it means is monitoring, data management through reporting, and a set of penalties. So talking about roles and responsibilities, there are a number of stakeholders in the EPR system. It's not only producers, it's not only recyclers. If you look at it, absolutely every component of society or close to that has a role to play. And clearly, an EPR design should clearly specify what is the role and responsibility of each stakeholders in terms of achieving the target, in terms of facilitating the ramp up of the solution, facilitating enforcement. And again, this clarity in terms of role and responsibilities will be a key to success. For instance, in the case of any consumer product, does retail have any obligation? Does retail have any responsibility? For instance, in facilitating collection. For instance, in facilitating education through material and messages displayed in stores, on the websites, etc. And to give you an idea, it's not a case by case, but your typical on the process producers, and in the case of packaging, for instance, you could have the packaging manufacturer who are manufacturing bottles and boxes and bags. You could have the fillers who are actually the brand owners distributing their products in the packages, and the retailers who are ensuring that the products are available to consumer. In a mirror effect, you could also have an importer who is importing packaging, who is importing packaged goods, but also distant sellers, online sellers, wholesalers. All those can be covered under regulation. On the public domain, we have obviously the Ministry of Environment, the Environment Agency, but we see very often other ministries taking a role, Ministry of Finance, because they questions arising out of the implementation of EPR, Ministry of Economy, because it means also jobs and investment, Ministry in charge of research and development, Ministry of Interior in charge of local authorities, municipalities, because they can play a role in education, they can play a role in waste collection. And then you can have maybe sometimes also other public authorities, depending on how the political and the administrative infrastructure of a country is set up. On the waste management side, you have the PRO. Once created, they become a stakeholders, and usually a very competent one, so that they have a role to play in consultation. But also waste managers and recyclers, logistics company who do transport, and the informal sector in many countries. And regarding society at large, NGOs are very often involved, whether they deal with environmental matters, social matters, or consumer protection. And academics have a role to play in R&D very often in providing their knowledge to support the development of EPR, and also consumers who are the one who make the decision whether they're going to put the waste in the right bin or they're going to neglect it. So just to give you an idea, very briefly, a case study on Brazil. So e-waste in Brazil has a story which started about 10 years ago. And it has not started yet operationally, but I want to highlight how the process developed on the regulatory standpoint and what learnings can be achieved through that. So it started out in 2010 through a national solid waste policy, which in Article 33, so that manufacturers, importers, distributors, and traders of electronic products and components needs to design and implement a take-back solution for end-of-life product. And that should be independent from the public service of urban cleaning and solid waste management. So in just 3 lines, they already say a lot about who is obligated and who is not. So manufacturer, importers, distributors, traders. They need to do take back, and they don't need to burden the municipalities with that. So after this law was passed, consultation started between stakeholders, and they decided to go through the route of a sectorial agreement. That is a negotiated discussion between the various parties in order to arrive at a detailed plan for the implementation and enforcement. Eventually, at the end of 2019, they concluded that no agreement could be achieved because the sectorial agreement was not reflecting exactly the Article 33. So ultimately, the government issued a federal decree in February. It was signed this February 2020, and now operation should start early 2021. So, and what is interesting is that they said, okay, we cannot do a big bang enforcement of the regulation all across Brazil, because Brazil is quite a large country. So they said, we're going to have a gradual ramp up, both in country coverage and in collection target. The initial ambition of the law is 80,000 inhabitants, and year on year, until you would achieve in 2025 on the return rate of 17%. There is a collateral target packaging for electronic. And between 2010 and 2020, we're talking about 10 years, and nothing. Some parties had an interest in starting as late as possible, because then there is also a lack of pre-existing infrastructure, especially in the north of the country, which was used as an objection. How can we achieve the target if the tools to achieve the target are not there? Then there was discussion about collection, and the incremental objection was interpreted by some as an ultimate target of 17%, while by others, it was interpreted as an ultimate target of 39%, which is the sum of 1 plus 3 plus 6 plus 12 plus 17, which really highlight the fact that you should really be clear on how you draft your laws. There is also in Brazil, but possibly in some other country, a very big complexity of the tax system. And Brazil is a federal state, and in between states, you don't have the same taxation, you don't have the same rules, you don't have the same document or the same template, which of course, to organize take back and recycling, where recycling sites are not in every state, was generating a lot of complexity. And the last bit of issue was that producers tried to negotiate a visible fee that would be allowing them a period of time to the consumers, so that it will be less of a burden in the beginning. And eventually it was denied, and it is not in the final setup, but it took a lot of time to negotiate. And just to give you a short highlight on the lack of infrastructure, on the left-hand side, you have a picture of Brazil, and you see that the north, which is approximately about 2/3, if not 3/4 of the total surface area of the country, is deprived of any recycling facility. And all the recycling are in the south, between Rio de Janeiro and Uruguay. And the north is very big. Just for reference, you see on the right-hand side, a picture of Brazil with the respective size of the number of countries it can contain. So that's quite of a challenge for these countries, but you could see that any country also in the MENA region could be faced with a large portion of the territory, which is not then cities and a lot of distance in between could create a type of logistics conundrum. So lesson learned from these first 10 years of e-waste in Brazil is that to avoid negotiation and that are dragging on, you need to make sure that all the stakeholders are engaged on all dimensions early on, that all the obstacles, all the objections, the concerns, the ambitions are really properly captured, aligned onto a common project. Out of that, establish clear roles, responsibilities, and targets, leaving no room for interpretation. One of the reasons why the sectorial agreement was not signed is because ultimately retail said, no, not us, we don't feel that we should play this role, which of course creating on the other hand a reaction from the producers. So this arrived quite late in the process, and it should be addressed very early and written in a crystal clear manner. The issue of infrastructure, of course, needs to be addressed and need to be used to phase the growth on the delivery. You need, of course, probably to consider to facilitate investment in infrastructure, but this takes time. And of course, the objectives and targets should reflect the realistic time it takes to implement infrastructure. And incentive should be considered to build the necessary infrastructure. And finally, combat complexity. Focusing on target and incentive is probably a very good idea. And whenever through the legacy systems, existing regulation, existing practices, is to address them also and try to simplify when it's possible. That is, when you are faced with a conflict of maybe two regulations, for instance, you can take the route of creating more complexity to overcome the issue or to simplify. And I think that for the success of EPR, simplifying is always better. Typically, the problem they had in Brazil was complexity of the tax regime and very high requirement on collection points, which traditionally are professional collection points, but are meant to become retailer collection points in EPR for e-waste, that is shops that cannot cope with the same level of demands from a regulatory standpoint. So if I want to summarize in a nutshell, what is the key condition for success on EPR? First of all, is to have a clear roadmap, set the objectives, identify and align with stakeholders, make a good market study, infrastructure study, demographic study of the country. Out of that, define what will be the operational setup of the EPR, especially in terms of targets, timelines, and role and responsibilities. Translate everything into a crystal clear legal framework that will contain enforcement mechanism, including penalties. Move on to designing the operational setup of the PRO, if there should be a PRO, and then start operation, but build from scratch performance monitoring, all necessary reporting, so that continuous improvement can be brought. And of course, together with continuous improvement, you need continuous enforcement. And from our experience, or 20 years experience in setting up EPR, this is our 7 golden rules. Set smart targets, define clear roles and responsibilities, ensure a level playing field between players, especially producers, empower and educate consumers, because they're the one making the gesture initially, set simple and equitable rules, ensure effective enforcement, and also promote research and development to ensure that the capacity in the country where you implement EPR can grow in an innovative manner. So I am done. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Christophe, also. So if I have to summarize what we have learned with you, I can say that EPR is a way to funding waste management. It relies also on involving manufacturer responsibility for the entire life cycle of product. EPR will increase waste sorting, so hence also maximizing resource efficiency. I can say also that EPR is a matter of collective producer responsibility because it offers a cost-efficient solution. And the most important, and before implementing EPR, we have to set up key objectives. So what we want to achieve through EPR. So thank you very much. And for sure, we are going to open the floor after all the communications. And without wasting time, I give the floor to Sebastian Frisch, Managing Director for Black Forest.
Yeah, hello, good morning, everyone. Sebastian Frisch is my name. I'm working for Black Forest Solutions. We are a waste management consulting company that is based in Berlin, Germany. And we are specialized in consulting in the Middle East, North African countries. And I just wanted to make a few points from the German perspective also to underline the utmost importance of EPR, as we have seen from our colleagues from Landbell. So in Germany, there were, in our point of view, two major milestones how to achieve the current status of a modern waste management. The first milestone, not chronologically, but to mention it, 2005, was the ban of untreated municipal solid waste being sent to landfill, which led effectively to new treatment technologies and new innovations for waste treatment. And the second major milestone, this is what we discussed, this is the EPR. And together, I think this was the basis for the German and also the European modern waste management that we see as of today. And Germany started already with the very first regulation for EPR as early as 1991, as also mentioned by our colleagues from Landbell, by the then minister, Dr. Töpfer. And these milestones, EPR and ban of landfill, also lead not only to legal restrictions, but also it opened a tremendous field for waste management company and opportunities. Through EPR, I think maybe Landbell can correct me, but at least I would say 1 billion euros per year are being collected in the German market through the system. And this gives a lot of opportunity, this fund, for an effective collection, for an effective source segregated waste collection, for the treatment, for the recycling. And in the end, this leads to the situation where we have now currently, according to the German Ministry of Environment, a recycling rate in Germany of 66%, which is one of the highest in the world. It also leads to about 270,000 jobs, employment of people who are working directly in the waste management field. So it's also a strong economic factor. And the waste management companies in Germany, according to the German Ministry of Environment, they have a turnover of combined 70 billion euros per year. And when you see it from the climate perspective, then through recycling, and which is based on the ban of landfill and EPR, Germany could save about 10% of their CO2 obligations in 2020 just by achieving the objectives in their waste management targets. So also by implementing these tools and these milestones, it's a very climate friendly move and step. And as mentioned, it triggers a lot of innovation. Germany has now more than 15,000 plans for waste treatment, more than 600 waste to energy plants, more than 1,300 sorting plants. And all this would not be possible when at the same time continuing just with the landfill and with no EPR obligations. And what we also see is that there is a growing demand from brands, so multinational brands like the big, say, Unilever or Coca-Cola or Pepsi, that they are more and more keen and much more aware than a few years ago how important this also is for their branding and for their responsibility. So we as consultants see that this is not this typical greenwashing anymore, so it's much more serious. Landfill, at the moment, we are implementing EPR strategies on behalf of GIZ for the countries of Egypt and Algeria. And together with Fraunhofer, we are working on the EMISC waste project in Kuwait. And the EPR will be also play a role in our strategy proposals. That's why I really see this as currently a start in the Middle East region to talk about EPR and hopefully not only talk, but also to implement first certain measures, certain milestones, and then later improve it year by year. This may be just a few remarks from my side. Thank you for this workshop and looking forward to the next presentations and the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. So I think that next time it will be for, let me check, for engineer Sami, if you can go ahead. Thank you.
أنه مسكر الصوت من عنده ما؟ مهندس سامي إذا ممكن الصوت مو طالع من عندك يا ريت تعمل أنميوت.
Yeah, Mr. Amir, now you're hearing me?
Yeah, it's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Karim. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Abdullah Nassour and Engineer Amir Bukhari to give me this opportunity to have a look at the meaning and the aim of the extended producer responsibility. Really, it's a new and a fresh information for me. It's a new business. And let me thank you, Mr. Christoph and Mr. Soma, this subject. At 1990, I were at Dresden University for 1 month studying solid waste management in a summer school. At that time, our teacher told us something new about packaging regulation. Once this regulation came into force in 1991, the retail and consumer goods industry established a new organization called Dual System Germany, DSD. DSD introduced the green dot label. You can see it on cans, yogurt, cups, and milk type food packaging. Manufacturers and distributors must pay a licensing fee in order to print the eco label on their products, which means at the end of the day, consumer has to pay extra money for a product's market with the green dot. This extra money directed to a brand private company for recycling the packaging waste resulted from their products after using it. The green dot system has been used for trash recycling in Germany for more than 30 years. But nowadays, I heard that this system was failed to meet its target because of a variety of reasons, mainly on issues of cost and efficiency. And part of the packaging waste was transported to the landfill rather than to the recycling facility. Here in the EBR, the producer has to pay extra money for recycling the waste resulted from their products after using it. My question is, what it makes difference between the EBR and the dual system? How you ensure that the EBR or a pro will not threaten it as the dual system? Do you think the regular audits or monitor will be enough? Thank you very much.
Shukran, thank you very much. If you don't mind, now we have to hear some words from Dr. Mohammed Khashashna. So, Dr. Mohammed, if you are hearing me, can you take the floor, please? أخ محمد خششنا. أخ محمد خششنا. Can you hear me? I think that Dr. Mohammed Khashashna is not available, so I think also that Dr. Hani asked for the floor. If you can go ahead.
Yeah, can أنا
ألو
أهلا الأخ محمد.
أهلا بك. أنا متأسف إني يعني انضميت متأخر بس وكان بودي إني أنضم في البداية. I don't know whether in which language I can speak.
It would be better if it could be in English.
Yes, I am happy to be with you in this conference, and I am so sorry that I came a little bit late. Today was like an emergency meeting due to the accident and big explosion happened in Beirut, and there is some action that we need to take in cooperation with the minister and other related ministers. But in any way, I am happy to be part of this conference and to share our experience and to learn from you how we can improve the file or the program of extended producer responsibility. Of course, Dr. Abdullah Nasur, our big drug, big colleague and friend, and yes.
Russian with English.
دكتور هاني معنا عشان هيك اسمع بس شفتك انا شو اسمه طلع معي روسي. I am so sorry. I will continue. Yes, happy to be a part of this group, and please looking forward to move this program ahead.
Mohammed, I think that you have something to say about your Jordan experience in implementing APR.
Where are we at the moment in APR in Jordan? This is the question.
Yes, thank you for the question. Actually, now we are submitting the regulation to the cabinet to be approved. We prepare a first draft of the regulation. It is according to the framework waste law, whereas one of the principle in the law to apply or to implement the extended producer responsibility. and to transfer this principle to action, the ministry prepared a draft legislation for this, and now we are consulting with our stakeholders. But because may you know that framework waste law has become enforced on 1st of September. It was published and approved on 1st of March, but it will become enforced after 6 months of the publication and adoption. And accordingly, we prepare a draft legislation. But frankly speaking, still we are consulting with our partners in this regard. But very soon we will invite the big producers of the packaging materials. And also we are working to have the electronic waste as part of this program, as well as the tires. We will include also in beyond the traditional thinking of starting with packaging material. We believe that electronic waste and maybe tires can be also streams where we can apply in this. I don't know whether we have in Germany or in other places such experience. I know it is maybe separate programs that it can called under different names. Maybe take back program, maybe EPR in some places, but the principle of to make sure that we can recollect or collect the electronics after it's become waste based on the principle of prior fees, maybe collection or OPR system. We don't know, it is not clear until now, but we are hoping that we can inject this with the draft legislation that we are proposing for the cabinet. We are working with the German side, with the GIZ and with other local partners. Of course, we are flexible to extend this cooperation with other partners. We can include another partners from Germany, from different places, from the Middle East, from North Africa, to learn from them. Maybe it is very important that we can compare ourselves with not once with developed countries. We can also consider the experience from our colleagues from Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, any country that we are in the same level of the development. If we can after, if you have maybe any question, I can also clarify more maybe points. We can share some experience after we can hear from other colleagues.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mohammed, for your useful sharing. Looking forward, of course, to hear more about it. I think that Dr. Hani want to add something about this topic.
Thank you, Mr. Karim, and I'm pleased to be with you today to discuss this very important topic. And thank you, Thomas and Christoph, for the comprehensive presentation and useful one. Actually, speaking about EPR, there is no universal formula that can be applied for in every country. It is a country specific. And as a matter of fact, there are a lot of high level of uncertainty in this regard. Since we are talking about a multi-stakeholders involved in the process of EPR, we are talking about, let me say, an improved shape of the polluters-based principle. We moved to EPR from polluters-based principle, and I understood that we have shifted the responsibility from the consumers to the producers. But when the producer will reflect this EPR cost on his product, it is again through the loop comes back to the consumer. Eventually, the consumers are paying. Am I right or not? I'm just raising this question for further clarification. Also, we are talking about the role of different countries. Can we have it within a boundary of one country, or we can have joint countries, for example, in the
Dr. Hani, we are not hearing you.
I hear you, but why you can't?
Now is okay. Now is okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, can we limit the EPR to the boundaries of one country, or we can, in the era of globalization, cover different countries by the same policy? This is another question. Just I'm raising those questions for brainstorming and hearing from the experts, Thomas and Christoph, about their experience in this regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hani. So our time's going out, so running out, sorry. So if you don't mind, I will give the floor to the attendees to ask questions. So who want to ask questions, just you can write something on the chat, and I will open the mic for him.
Hello. Hi. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead. You're welcome.
Hi, my name is Munir Bughanem. I work for the Environment Agency in Abu Dhabi. We're working on the implementation of the Abu Dhabi single-use plastic policy. And in the single-use plastic policy, we have a target to recover 50% of the plastic bottles, single-use plastic bottles from the retailers based on incentives and not based on a deposit. The discussion around the implementation of this particular initiative has led us to a further discussion on applying EPR schemes. There is in the United Arab Emirates currently a coalition of the private sector, the big corporations working in the country, which is called Coalition Circle, and which is led by the Ministry of Environment. And you know that the United Arab Emirates is a union of several emirates, so it would be quite challenging to apply regulations across the 7 emirates without having each emirate approving them. So the question is very straightforward. We have been working on introducing EPR in a single-use plastic law that we are drafting for Abu Dhabi. However, the question is about the application of an EPR on voluntary basis, working with the private sector to cover the rest of the country, not to affect the competitiveness of each of the emirates alone. Are there any cases of voluntary application of EPR schemes working with, driven by the private sector? Maybe the government can provide some regulatory enabling environment, but not a full mandatory application of the scheme. Do you have any case that you are aware of for the voluntary application of EPR?
Thank you very much, Munir. So I think that Christoph could answer your question.
Yes, gladly. So effectively, there are existing initiatives of producers who organize themselves with a view to establish a voluntary EPR or to prepare for an upcoming EPR that will arrive later. I have two cases to talk about as an example, which I think is interesting. In France, some years ago, there was a voluntary program for end-of-life ink cartridges, toner cartridges, inkjet cartridges for printers. And it's quite a concentrated market. You don't have many producers for that. And they agreed to join into a voluntary initiative and created a voluntary PRO. And they had kind of an indicative commitment plan with the Ministry of Environment, which went on for years, for a long time with that, until eventually cartridges were mostly integrated into the e-waste directive in Europe. But that was, I think, a reasonably successful endeavor. One could question the actual collection rate that was achieved versus what could have been achieved with a more constraining target through regulatory text, for instance. But nevertheless, it created the option for consumer to discard at no cost their cartridges. And another example that I want to highlight, which I think is worth listening about because it failed. Some years ago, we were contacted by a consortium of battery manufacturers in the United States. And they were telling us, we want to create a take-back solution for batteries in the US, and there is no federal level regulation for this type of waste. And they were saying going state by state and waiting for regulation is going to take forever because there are like 50 states. And so they said, we're going to do the voluntary endeavor. And they were preparing, consulting with us and others in order to select a solution. And eventually it led nowhere because one of the members of the coalition decided to exit for their own reason. And then the other one said, we cannot continue because it's either we all on board or nobody's on board, because otherwise we will create a solution, we will face the cost, and there will be a free rider. And this company which has left the coalition will enjoy the same benefit that we do without paying the cost. And it totally stopped. And then they went to revert to a state-by-state regulatory approach with very little sign of progress. And I'm talking about something that took place close to 10 years ago. So I think that voluntary approach can be a good Kickstarter, can be, it's certainly better than nothing, but it only works among the volunteers. And if you want to capture all producers into the same scope of work, you need to move to some level of coercion, some level of mandatory.
Thank you very much, Christophe. I think that Marwan from Kuwait want to ask a question.
Oh yes, thank you very much. This is Marwan Al-Dimashqi from Kuwait Environment Public Authority. Good morning, everyone. I already wrote in the chat 2 questions. I will start with the second one, and I received the answer from Thomas, I think. The second question was about can we really apply the EPR system in countries in the Middle East, for example, like Kuwait, where we don't have the infrastructure for segregation of the waste at source, and specifically talking about electronic waste, used batteries and others. I think Sebastian has already addressed this point, that the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany is already working with Kuwait Environment Public Authority on a long-term project for producing the inventory and the waste management strategy for Kuwait and action plans. But in my experience, and I think Sebastian can elaborate more if he's still with us, it's quite difficult. Now we are relying on illegal collection of waste, scavengers, not really regulated by the government. And it's not done at the source, it's done in the landfill site or dump site. So again, the already embedded cost for the cost of collection, recycling, or final disposal of the waste being paid by the consumer, but can't be applied if we don't have the structure and the legal framework to enforce the companies to collect this waste and recycle it or dispose it. So this is a question again for Christopher and for Sebastian to see if we can really apply the EPR system in our region where we lack the infrastructure for the waste segregation. Thank you. Of course, the first question was we already paying probably when we purchase the product, we are already paying the cost of the EPR. So what if in countries like ours, this product was produced in Europe, the cost of it was paid when we pay it here, when we purchase the instrument, for example, a refrigerator or a mobile phone or others, so the packaging or the batteries or the electronic waste, it's already been paid, but the EPR system is not applied outside the country who produced that product. Thank you.
So, Christophe, here, if I may provide a part of the answer. So, can we create an EPR system where there is no infrastructure or no sufficient infrastructure? The
yes,
answer
this is my question.
Yeah, the answer is absolutely yes. And the purpose of the EPR system then should be also to consider how to develop such infrastructure. In the case of Brazil, for instance, you've seen the gradual increment of the collection points to be developed first in cities with more than 80,000 inhabitants. So it's one way to recognize that you cannot be at 100% from day one, that you need to build gradually your take-back system. So segregation at the source is typically an operational cost that an EPR system should face. And it happens in various manners. If there is already municipal infrastructure to rely on, like would be the case in Germany, for instance, then this municipal infrastructure can still play a role. But in case there is no such infrastructure, then it will have to be developed from scratch by the PRO, which is to a large extent what is happening in Brazil, which is also what is happening in Singapore, where the country has decided to establish an EPR for e-waste. And there is the configuration of the country does not allow for municipal infrastructure, so it has to be developed independently from any pre-existing network of possible collection points.
Well, let me interrupt you. I mean, in practice, in a country like in Kuwait, until now, used batteries are thrown in the dustbin and it goes to the landfill. The lamps, the electronic waste, they are the same. Whereas in Europe, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Yeah. So you see, the infrastructure is essential in this case to apply the EPR. Otherwise, look, for example, in Germany, you place the used batteries in the supermarket in the dedicated box. The same applies for the lamps, and you take the electronic devices to a special location where you place it, and a specialized company will come and collect it. But we don't have this structure here in the Middle East.
No, and that would be the role of the PRO to build it. So why do you find boxes in supermarkets in Germany? It's because the PROs have put the boxes there.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That I'm talking about. You are saying, yes, you can apply the PRO system, although there is no infrastructure for the regulated collection of waste.
Yeah, absolutely. You need, it would be a key part of the mission of the PRO to develop the collection network, that is to procure containers, receptacles to collect the waste, to engage with retail, maybe to engage with companies and households, you know, managers, to place such receptacles at a location that is convenient for the public. And that's not enough, because the public have been doing throw them in the bin and have done that forever. It will take time and education and communication. That should also be managed by the PRO and maybe with in partnership with the Ministry of Environment to educate the people to say, okay, no, there is another place where you should put your batteries. It's not in the bin. Put it in a small box in the bag at home. And when it's filled up, go to the supermarket nearby your home in order to drop it in a bigger box. And this is exactly how it started in Germany and other European countries. At the beginning, the situation was the same. There was no infrastructure for that.
And I will also add, until now, the most practiced collection of the waste, for example, the cardboards and the cartoons and the boxes, this is the packaging waste. It's being collected illegally by scavengers from the side. From each street, you see cars are collecting these cardboards and they take it and they sell it. So it has to be regulated to apply the APR, hasn't it?
Yes, indeed. And if you have such scavengers in the country, of course, they are collecting it because they are making their livelihood out of it. And there are two ways to go at this situation. One is to say, sorry, guys, you don't touch it anymore, and you will have to do extremely active and continuous enforcement of that. Or you find a way to integrate their work, what they do, into the formal collection system that the PRO will put in place, so that you leverage the activity they're already using. You allow them to continue living through this activity, but you capture the cardboard, the boxes, in order to ensure accountability, reporting, and the destination you want for such boxes. So it's a challenge in a number of countries, and depending on how strong the informal sector is, it may be better to work with them than against them.
Just to clarify one point, please, for my first question, when I purchase a computer or a fridge or a mobile phone here in the Middle East from a company or producer in Europe, am I already paying the cost for the APR system, or am I not?
No, typically what happens is that products become regulated once they are placed on the European market. If they are not placed on the European market but exported, then they do not count and they do not pay a fee. Meaning that if you would put in place your own type of EPR locally, there would be no price paid twice. Okay, so everything that is exported escapes usually the cost of EPR in Europe. We're also raising the question that in any case, will the consumer pay for EPR? I would say ultimately yes, because producers will either charge it on top of the price, and that is called the visible fee. And that only applies on some market where it is regulated like this, or then it is just part of the cost of goods sold. So it's going to be integrated into the price of the product, like distribution is integrated on design and marketing and everything. So
what you are saying that if a product in Germany...
Say Marwan.
Sorry, it took so long. I'm sorry about that.
Sorry to return.
Well, Mr. Karim, your voice is... can't hear you well.
The moderator.
There is a problem.
Yeah, I've had the connection problem, so I'm back again. I don't know how much was wondering if there's other questions from.
Yeah, we should open the floor for other questions. Sorry about that.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, who wants to take the floor? Who has a question to the?
May I interfere here once again?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, thank you. My understanding is that in order to implement EPR, the separate collection should not be in place. It is not a prerequisite to start it, rather than the PRO will establish that during the implementation of the EPR system. Am I right, Mr. Christoph?
You are right, that it's part of the PRO's role usually to establish the collection network, to do whatever is needed in terms of engaging private or public parties to acquire or rent or make available receptacles of various sizes and materials. What can happen is that in some countries, you may already have a pre-existing channel. And in such case, maybe the PRO is going to work with the pre-existing channel rather than start something anew. But in a country which is really entering the very first steps of waste segregation, solid waste segregation, it's very likely that the PRO will have to do from scratch, like you said.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Maybe to add on this one, Thomas Fischer speaking. There was also the question whether several countries could cooperate under one policy for EPR. And this could also be one of the solutions for that, because of course, not for the collection, but at least for the treatment and recycling. So of course, for a PRO, it would be possible to operate one system under one policy for multiple countries. That's basically what ERP, so our company, is doing as a pan-European scheme. So we have one big company. Of course, we have local entities which have to follow local circumstances. But in general, we follow one EU policy. A similar thing would be possible in the Middle East, of course, as well. But of course, it's more a political question how the policy would work on the different, for different countries. And where we place the investments and so on. So it's causing a lot of political questions, but for a PRO, it will be possible to implement that, to answer that question as well. But it might support also, of course, at the beginning. So recycling facilities are quite expensive to set those up. It, of course, at the same time brings also jobs into the country. And so this is to be decided where to do it and how to do it, and the PRO can facilitate that and can support here. But it's also a kind of chicken and egg, so to say. So the legislation, so the legal framework is quite important here, because the legal framework is providing security for investment. security investment for recyclers, security for investment for PROs, maybe also for the producers to engage with us. So this is quite significant. So, and this can go hand in hand. So they have the policy coming at start, and the PRO start to develop that, and then the state sets realistic but stretch target every year, maybe, or every second year revise those, like the infrastructure is being set up in the country.
Thank you, Thomas. Basim Abbasi, you want to say something, I guess?
Yes, hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Basim Abbasi, and actually I'm originally from Jordan, currently in Canada. So it's 4:40 in the morning in Canada now. So my question is basically regarding the stewardship, or the stewardship. Is it something related to or product stewardship? Is it something related to the EPR, or do you think it's something else?
No, just it's different term for the same thing. Like dual system, by the way, as well. So it's all in the concept a similar thing.
Yes, the stewardship is well, according to my understanding, stewardship is also part of municipal responsibility and also the individual responsibility. So me as a producer of solid waste, I'm also responsible. So this is what I think of stewardship. It is a shared responsibility. However, extended responsibility is a producer responsibility, I believe. I'm just asking.
No, not necessarily. So it's an American term for extended producer responsibility. They call it product stewardship typically. That's how we know that. It could maybe add something on substance management, something like that. So product stewardship could be a bit wider than EPR. But for all the aspects of take back and recycling, it's basically the same concept. Producers are financing that. And also the EPR system, as I showed on the slides, and also Christoph mentioned, so we work with municipalities because municipalities collect. So in Germany is often mentioned as an example. So in Germany, we have joint collection points for e-waste. So that's the same collection point where the municipalities also collect metallic scrap or something like that. So it's the same point. But at the same time, we also run other collection points for electronic waste, which is in the shops. And here we work with the dealers, not with the municipalities. So it's a mixed approach. Municipalities often play a role, and this is what you maybe see under the product stewardship in North America.
Okay, so I'm just very, very quick regarding the legal framework of the EPR. I believe in our countries, in our in the Middle East and North African countries, I believe there is a hope of EPR if we can show that the EPR is a lucrative and profitable tool or platform or waste management system. So it all depends on legislation, of course. If there is a will, there is a way, and the one who is responsible for having the will in order to make it possible in our countries is the government itself, is the legislator itself. So the legislator is not gonna take an action towards stewardship program or EPR program unless there is a reference for lucrative examples. So some successful stories where the government would see that this is something that can bring money to the government, to the country, and to the stewardships. So we need to show them that this is possible, but economically feasible, economically profitable, economically lucrative type of stewardship programs.
Yeah, maybe just a comment to that one. So actually, this was not the motivation in Europe to set up EPR. So the motivation for the setup of EPR was to solve a problem. The problem of increasing waste volumes, but it started with packaging because we had significant increases in packaging waste due to changes in lifestyle of people and getting richer or whatever. So we had more consumption, that's why we had more packaging waste. And EPR was an answer to find a solution for that without requesting municipal budget for that, without requesting the last user to pay for, because they will never do that. They throw it in the forest or wherever instead of paying. So that's why the producer should pay for. That was the idea. And of course, for a PRO, it should be it should be economically feasible. They should be able to get back the cost they see from the collection, from the logistics, from the recycling, and the operation of their own entity from the producers. Whether it's for profit or non-for-profit is a different thing. For the state, there are two things. The PRO solves the problem under EPR because the waste is treated. The second is, of course, we pay taxes. Apart from that, I think, it will also generate jobs in the country. So that are the three main reasons for the state. For the producers, it's normally not profitable because the producers pay the PRO to solve the problem.
Thank you very much, Basim, for your contribution. Thank you, Thomas, also for your useful detailed information. I can see that Rizgar Bewani, you want to ask a question?
Yes, hello. Uwe Becker from the GIZ. May I ask a question, Karim, please?
Yeah, go ahead, of course.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for this interesting presentation in the workshop. And thank you, Abdallah, for inviting me. I have a short question, which might be difficult to answer. Is there any idea about a realistic timetable or timetable for implementing a EPR system, maybe for tires or for PET bottles or something like that? Maybe not the whole range of products, but maybe selected streams. Is there a realistic estimation possible? And what are the preconditions?
Okay, it's a difficult question indeed. So I think it depends a lot about the local circumstances. So there's no timetable being applicable, which one size fits all. In a country where you have the infrastructure existing and you have a certain culture of waste segregation, so it's very easy to add another waste stream, maybe because it's another bin or another collection point for the consumer. So maybe it's possible. In a country where there's not much existing, I think this needs to be an iterative process. So we have a process of setting targets, also a legal framework with targets. The target should be achievable considering local circumstances. So it needs a local review, and this is what Christoph also said at the first step in the 7 steps. Consider the local circumstances and come up with realistic measures. And then, of course, the PRO starts to set up the collection, and then step by step we can improve the system and can align it to each other. So collection points, infrastructure for recycling, scope of the coverage. So Christoph, for example, showed the example in Brazil. They started with the big cities only to make it workable at the beginning, because here it's easier to set up an infrastructure, avoiding huge logistics costs for basically almost no waste. So this is a step-by-step approach, and we would need to look at country by country or region by region, depending on how the setup should look like.
Okay, yeah. I was not quite sure whether you can answer that question, but okay. No, I understand. Okay, it depends where, if you start from scratch, which is the case at the moment for us here in Algeria. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you,
In the case of tires or any product also if the number of potentially obligated producers and importer is limited, maybe it's easier to get a quick start. But that is to get them aligned and committed on common general targets. However, as mentioned by Thomas, then you need to take stock of the reality of the ground, of the legislative process, in order to arrive at a solution that can start. If we look at Europe only, and yes, it was a therefore multi-country procedure, to arrive at the EU directive on electronic waste, it took over 3 years, I think, when it was first published, and then the first countries to start took 2 years to implement, and the slowest countries took 5 years to implement.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. So I think before we close, we can hear something maybe from Abdullah, Dr. Abdullah. Huh? Dr. Abdullah, the floor is yours.
Yeah, really, thanks for all. Thanks, Thomas. Thanks, Christoph, for the great presentation. Thanks for all participants. But I think that's very good discussion. I like it. It's mean to start to think about reality financing of waste management in the Arab country. It's mean we are together. We are one team, and we will work together to reach our target. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Abdullah. So I think that we come to the end of our meeting.
If you allow me, Lahi, final also 2 words from my side.
Of course, Dr. Mohammed.
First of all, I would like to thank you very much, Dr. Abdullah Nasser, for organizing this conference. I believe that it is not the last one. We will continue, and we will be prepared maybe better next time, at least from our side, and our legislation will be advanced a little bit after consultation with the partners here in Jordan, including our colleagues from universities that I see they are participating in the meeting. At the same time, we are looking to have or to share the experience in EPR with our colleagues from different countries, in particular from the expert from Germany. Again, we are looking to have this very ambitious program in very short time. Next step for Jordan to consult, as I said, with the producer and to advance the legislation. Once again, thank you, Karim, to moderate this very important conference, and for our colleagues from different agencies and countries. And thank you to share your experience with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mohammed. So I'd like to thank you for your useful contributions. And if you don't mind, I will give back the floor to Amir for closing words. Hope seeing you soon. Bye-bye.
We arrived to the final now. Finally, I want to thank Thomas and Christoph for very important presentation and discussions. Thank you very much to Dr. Abdullah Nasser for his support for this webinar. Thank you also for Engineer Karim Oman for the excellent management of this webinar. Also, thanks for Dr. Hani Aboudes for helping of arrangement. Thank you for all the participants for their following and interacting in this webinar. We are looking to next month to the 4th webinar about solid waste management. And at the end, let me thank my daughter, Engineer Ghadi Bukhari, because he is who prepared for this communications in this webinar. Thank you very much. We hope to see you again. Engineer Karim, we finish now.
I would say thank you Engineer Amir for the great efforts in organization, in communication, in translation as well. You did a very good job, really. We're proud of that.
Thank you for you.
See you soon.
See you.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Goodbye.